More than a quarter of the way into the season, and we've had some pretty crazy storylines already in the NBA, from the drama surrounding the Brooklyn Nets to the defending champion Warriors getting off to a slow start, to the New Orleans Pelicans sitting at the top of the Western Conference, to the so far failed Rudy Gobert experiment in Minnesota, and then to the LA Lakers getting off to yet another slow start, although maybe that wasn't as much of a surprise. But be all of that as it may, as the season continues to wear on, it becomes more and more clear which teams are for real and which teams are not. And for those who thought that they were going to be making some headway from the prior season and coming up short so far, it might be time for a fresh start in revamping their roster. So in today's video, we're going to be discussing teams that are most likely to implode and blow up their roster in the coming months before the NBA trade deadline. If you're new to the channel and you enjoy the content, feel free to subscribe, as this is a brand new channel and it would mean a great deal to me to help it grow. I'm also going to be doing a jersey giveaway. When the channel reaches 5,000 subscribers, you'll get a chance for a jersey of your choice on me. All you have to do is subscribe to the channel to be entered. But anyway, let's talk about some of these teams who are most likely to implode based on what we have seen so far this season, starting with the Miami Heat. The Heat, after having finished with the #1 seed last season, were just a possession away from going to the NBA Finals and in narrowly losing Game 7 of the Eastern Conference Finals to the Celtics. They were in the finals in the bubble before losing to the Lakers in 6 games. Like, this team was legitimately set up to be a title contender. You knew the Heat likely weren't going to be as good in repeating finishing at the top of the Eastern Conference like they did last year, given they lost PJ Tucker. Jimmy Butler and Kyle Lowry are obviously getting older. Duncan Robinson's game completely fell off a cliff at the end of last season, but you would not have expected them to start out as poorly as they have. They just signed Tyler Hero to that massive contract extension in the offseason, which, if you caught my video from a few weeks back talking about some of the worst contracts in the offseason, Tyler Hero was actually at the top of that list, especially considering the Heat just gave out another big contract to a one-dimensional sharpshooter in Duncan Robinson the offseason prior. And look at how that has panned out for them. Kyle Lowry is still well past his prime now and not the same player that he used to be, and although Jimmy Butler is still playing very well and their best player, even he has started showing some signs of regression, as he hasn't been able to stay on the court and hasn't shown the same level of defensive tenacity that we're used to seeing from him. Still a great defender, but he hasn't been as quick with his lateral footwork and ability to get into passing lanes like we used to see back in his prime. And so for the Miami Heat, a team that had title aspirations, who now sit just a half game outside of the play-in the Eastern Conference, are now sitting in a position. Where do they take this team next? And what's the direction going forward? They're kind of on two different timelines, where they have the aging veterans of Butler and Lowry. They have the younger core guys like Bam Adebayo, Tyler Hero, Gabe Vincent, to an extent Max Strus and Duncan Robinson. They've got a few expiring contracts, but then a ton of money locked up for the future. And you look at this team, 25th in the league on offense, a net rating of -1.7, which is 24th in the league. Their three-point shooting has dipped significantly from last year. Not a good rebounding team, not a good shot blocking team, not a good scoring team. So what do? Clearly, changes have to be made from the Heat's perspective, and there are a couple of routes for which they can go. One, you do everything you can to try and get something out of your bag contracts. Move Duncan Robinson, treat it as a sunk cost, and trade him for pennies on the dollar. Try and move Kyle Lowry to a team that is actually a championship contender and in need of a point guard to come off the bench for some veteran experience. You try to get some younger assets, some players who aren't getting a ton of playing time on their respective teams because their team is looking to win now and not really focused on developing project players for the future. You move Victor Oladipo because he's most likely going to take that player option on the final year of his deal worth $9.4 million. Get the money off the books, and you retool the roster with Jimmy Butler leading the way as your veteran and best player, and continue to develop that young core. Or the other option is you go full nuclear. Not only do you trade the players I just mentioned, but you move Jimmy, knowing as of right now, he still has a lot of value in a trade. He's an all-star level player, still one of the best two-way players in the NBA, and you have to consider it because the landscape of the league and the market for trading star players has completely shifted with the amount of draft picks teams were giving up to get DeJounte Murray and Rudy Gobert. If the Jazz got 4 draft picks for Rudy Gobert, really 5 if you include Walker Kessler, and that's not even counting the pick swaps either, and if the Spurs were able to get 3 picks for DeJounte Murray, you should be able to get a massive haul for Jimmy Butler, who in my opinion is better than both of those guys. Jimmy is older, yes, and his contract isn't going to age very well. He still has 3 more seasons under contract after this one, where he'll be getting paid $52 million by the time he's 37. But a team that is looking for that one piece to be a title contender that needs to get them over the hump would likely be willing to take on that contract for a short-term benefit and worry about it later. For the Heat, You completely start fresh. You build around Bam and Tyler Hero. You likely get draft compensation, other young players in trading Jimmy Butler. You free up a ton of cap space, which you're going to need because you have to pay guys like Max Strus and Gabe Vincent if you want to keep them around, who are on expiring minimum contracts. And in this instance, the Heat start over but still have a very talented young core to work with for the future. And again, likely some good draft picks to work with it, assuming that they're actually able to acquire a good amount of picks for Jimmy Butler. I know Heat fans are going to come at me in the comments saying it's way too early in the season to be thinking about blowing up this roster, which to an extent I agree. There's still a lot of basketball left to be played, but at the same time, you can't sit there and tell me that this is a title contending team even if they start getting things together and stringing some wins. They're just not on that level right now. The next team most likely to implode and blow up the roster, it pains me to say it, it is my Chicago Bulls. Now, from the Bulls' perspective, this still doesn't make sense to simply hit the reset button given it's just now year 2 into the new look roster with DeRozan, Vucevic, and Levine, and you don't even have Lonzo Ball back, who you would hope would return this season, although that's looking more and more unlikely. And aside from it being way too early to just quit on this roster after the all-in moves they made to get these guys, the fact of the matter is the Bulls don't have their draft pick this year unless it falls into the top 4. It would be such a risky move for the Bulls to blow everything up, trade their big 3, and hope that they're bad enough that their pick falls within the top 4 and somehow have a shot at Victor Wembanyama. So for me personally, I still think it's very unlikely the Bulls blow up their roster because it wouldn't really get them anywhere, knowing that they likely have to ship that pick to Orlando, and they also don't have their first round pick in 2025, which they traded in that sign and trade for DeMar DeRozan. But be that as it may, I think even the most die-hard Bulls fans will admit this team is not a title contending team, and despite the front office making quote-unquote win-now moves the prior offseason, it's clear this roster isn't it, and likely is a first-round exit at the most, even if Lonzo does come back. So what do? They've got 2 aging veterans in Vucevic and DeMar DeRozan. Vuce is on an expiring deal. DeMar still has 1 more season on the books after this one. Lonzo Ball still has 2 more years on his deal after this season. Same with Alex Caruso. The most plausible course of action is you trade DeMar DeRozan and Nikola Vucevic for some younger players and draft compensation. Vucevic's trade value isn't going to be as high considering he hasn't been playing like his former all-star self and he's on an expiring contract, but DeRozan is still playing at a very high level. He's on a fairly team-friendly deal relative to his production. He should give you good value in a trade for a team that is looking to go all in this year. And in this instance for the Bulls, you don't completely blow it up. You get rid of your older players, focus on building around Zach LaVine and your younger core. It enables you to develop those younger players more, like Patrick Williams and Ayo Dosunmu getting more experience and touches without DeMar demanding the ball and taking most of the shot attempts, or you really blow it up, trade the whole big 3, maybe even include Alex Caruso because he'll give you good value, get a ton of draft picks and or young players, and you tank and just pray that the pick falls into the top 4. But again, I still think that is way too risky of a strategy if you're the Bulls, and it's never a good message to the team to just be in a perpetual state of rebuilding like the Chicago Bulls have been. The next team on the list likely to implode, you guessed it, the LA Lakers. I mean, look, this team is going nowhere. They have their superstar players in LeBron James and Anthony Davis. LeBron is in the final years of his career. Anthony Davis has been playing very well as of late, but there is always the uncertainty of his long-term health. And then outside of that, they've got an expiring contract with Westbrook that they have been trying to get out of, but no one wants him unless he's packaged with a couple of picks from the Lakers, which the Lakers can't send until way out into the future. They don't have many picks to work with for the future because they traded a lot of their future picks to New Orleans for Anthony Davis, and they really have nothing going for them outside of that. Very little depth, little draft capital, just an aging LeBron, Anthony Davis, and Russ. Yeah, Lonnie Walker has been nice for them. That's been somewhat of a success story in terms of an offseason signing and a guy who is still young and still has potential. But outside of that, what do the Lakers have going for them? The Lakers are a team that I would consider to have the highest likelihood of imploding this season, completely tearing it down and starting fresh, including potentially trading LeBron James, because even though LeBron James is your biggest cash cow in terms of what gets people watching the Lakers, you know that at his age, about to be 38, he's only going to have 1 to 2 seasons max of productive play. And you just signed him to an extension that will pay him big money when he's 40 years old. You know long term this isn't going to be a viable option, and you know while short term it'll put the Lakers in even worse shape than before if they do trade him. The fact of the matter is LeBron James is still one of the best players in the league. He's still incredibly productive, and he's still LeBron James, a guy most teams would be chomping at the bit to get. And if you're the Lakers, you know this team isn't going to be going very far as currently constructed. You don't even have your draft pick for this upcoming season. You don't have much to build with for the future. You tear it down, trade LeBron James, get a ton of draft capital, young players to work with for the future that have potential, and at that rate, if you're moving LeBron, you might as well move Anthony Davis while his value was actually just shot up when it was at an all-time low over the offseason. Also a player you can get a lot for in a trade as it relates to building for the future. And then for Westbrook, I mean, honestly, I would just keep him and let his contract expire so you don't have to ship out more picks in order to get rid of him. That would also free up massive amount of cap space because literally outside of Anthony Davis and LeBron and Max Christie, the entire Lakers roster is on expiring deals. A ton of cap space, lots of draft capital, and young assets that they would hopefully be able to get in trading LeBron and Anthony Davis. You start fresh and you go in a different direction rather than trying to chase something that isn't going to happen by clinging on to LeBron's final good years. And then the last team I have on this list as a candidate to implode and tear everything down is the Philadelphia 76ers. They have been trusting the process for a long time, and it hasn't gotten them very far outside of just losing in the second round year after year. Like all those years tanking, being one of the worst teams in the NBA where they were consistently winning less than 20 games in a season. They had that year where they went 10-72 and yet haven't even gone to the conference finals as a result of it. Now, they're not having as bad of a start to their season as the teams that we just talked about, but it's not great either, considering the talent they have on that roster and the fact that this is a team that had title aspirations for years now and yet always fall short. They just signed James Harden to that 2-year deal worth $68.8 million. He hasn't been the same James Harden that we used to see in Houston. Tobias Harris, who they signed to that 5-year max deal in 2019, he still has another year left on his deal after the season. And then, of course, Joel Embiid, in the peak of his prime, he's on a max contract all the way through 2027. They gave a pretty sizable contract to PJ Tucker for a 37-year-old player, including a player option on the final year of his deal. Matisse Thybulle has completely fallen off, and what looked like a good defensive option for the future for the Sixers is now in effect out of the rotation. Like, this is the last year where I expect the Sixers to give the process one final shot. And I don't mean Joel Embiid, I know that's his nickname. I'm more so referring to the process that the Sixers have trusted in tanking to build a dynasty level team. And if they come out and are sitting 500 by the trade deadline, yeah, they're going to blow things up. And while I can't see them ever moving on from Joel Embiid, like you can't trade a player who is a top 5 player in the NBA into the peak of his prime, but that may not stop Embiid from having enough and wanting out and request a trade. He gets frustrated, says, I'm tired of not getting the right players around me. I want to win a championship and I don't want my prime wasted with multiple second round exits year after year. And in the event that that happens and the Sixers are forced to trade Embiid, you know that means they're not keeping guys like James Harden, Tobias Harris, since if you're losing Embiid, you're just going to tear it down. Build for the future with a franchise cornerstone like Tyrese Maxey, develop guys like Melton and Milton, and get draft capital and assets for the future by moving your superstar level players. Again, this is only in the event that Embiid demands a trade. They're not going to move Embiid of their own volition. I do see an instance though, if this team continues to underperform and Joel is unhappy, they make some swift changes by trading Tobias Harris and even potentially James Harden to either get some younger players or another all-star level player that better complements Embiid. This would be more of a retool the process of putting a new roster around Joel Embiid to see if it can get the Sixers over the hump. Other teams that could potentially blow up their roster as honorable mentions, but probably unlikely, the Dallas Mavericks after their slow start and Luka visibly getting frustrated with his teammates. Another is potentially the Brooklyn Nets if they don't make clear strides forward in being a true contender. And then the other would be the LA Clippers if they decide to pull the plug on the Paul George and Kawhi Leonard experiment, since neither of these guys can stay healthy on the court consistently. But let me know what you guys think, and if there were any teams you think I missed that have a high likelihood of blowing up their team, be sure to subscribe and I'll catch you in the next one.